Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating, data-driven story, the colossal trade relationship between India and the United States. Looking at the 2022 to 2023 financial year, these numbers reveal a literal masterclass in global economics, manufacturing power, and, well, how to turn raw earth into billions of dollars in profit. So, let's get right into it.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll look at the overarching US-India dynamic, break down the top imports and exports, dive into the value addition story, and wrap up with the massive trade surplus it creates. All right, Section 1, the US-India trade dynamic. Before we look at the individual items, we really need to understand the sheer scale of goods flowing into India.
Get a load of this number. In the 2022 to 2023 financial year, India imported a massive $46.8 billion worth of goods from the USA. I mean, just sit with that for a second. That's nearly $47 billion leaving India to purchase American products and materials in a single year. It is a colossal foundation of trade. But, what exactly is all that money buying?
That brings us to Section 2, Top Imports from America. Let's break down that $46.8 billion to see what a rapidly growing economy actually needs to fuel its industries.
Okay, looking at ranks 10 through 6, we're seeing the foundational building blocks of a growing economy. We're talking everything from basic plastics and commodities at over $1 billion each to heavy-duty chemicals, machinery, and even aircraft. India is essentially buying the tools it needs to manufacture and transport on a massive scale.
Now, moving into the top 5, the focus shifts heavily toward energy and raw materials. We're looking at billions spent on coal and petroleum products. But definitely keep your eye on spots 5 and 2, $1.7 billion on gold and a staggering $5 billion on precious stones. Stick a pin in those because they are the absolute secret to this whole story. But sitting way up there at number 1, towering over literally everything else, is crude oil. India is pulling in a massive $10 billion of unrefined petroleum from the USA in a single year. It's the absolute lifeblood of their industrial momentum right now.
So this naturally brings us to a pretty fascinating question. India is handing over $46.8 billion for all these raw materials, chemicals, and fuel, right? But what exactly does India give back to the United States in return? How on earth do they balance the scales?
Well, let's flip the script in Section 3, Top Exports to America. Let's see what India is selling back.
Looking at ranks 10 through 5, the picture changes immediately. We aren't really looking at raw earth anymore. From telecom instruments to iron, steel, and finished garments, these are processed, manufactured goods, stuff that requires serious labor and infrastructure.
Then we hit the top 4, and we get into the really high-skill goods. We've got billions in gold jewelry and petroleum products. And check out number 2. India sends $6.1 billion in pharmaceutical drugs and medicines straight to the US. These are critical healthcare medications, which really showcases a highly advanced manufacturing sector. And taking the absolute top spot, precious stones. America buys a massive $8.5 billion worth from India. So if you noticed, the top export perfectly mirrors that massive import we saw earlier, just with a vastly higher price tag attached.
And that brings us to Section 4, the value addition story. This is where the magic really happens, and where we connect the dots between what India buys and what it sells.
Remember that $1.7 billion in raw gold imports? Well, they don't just lock it away in a vault somewhere. Indian artisans and factories craft it and export $3.2 billion back to the US as finished jewelry. They take the raw material, add some incredible design work, and boom, they nearly double the money. I mean, talk about an upgrade.
We see this exact same engine at work with fuel. India takes in that massive $10 billion of unrefined raw crude oil, utilizes its massive refining infrastructure to process it, and then turns around and sells $5.5 billion of highly refined petrol products right back to America. They're practically acting as a giant global refinery.
And we see that value-add magic again with precious stones. India imports $5 billion of rough stones, right? Then, leaning into their world-renowned diamond cutting and polishing industry, they transform those rough rocks into dazzling gems.
They're turning a $5 billion import into an $8.5 billion export. That is $3.5 billion of pure value created entirely by human skill and industry. It's also super fascinating to see how this plays out in heavy industry. While India buys $1.5 billion in machinery from the US, they actually sell back even more machinery, $2.5 billion worth. It proves this is a highly symbiotic, two-way street where India isn't just consuming American technology, but actually producing and competing in that exact same space.
Finally, Section 5, the massive trade surplus. Let's see how this entire strategy impacts the ultimate bottom line. When we visualize the total side by side, the pure genius of this strategy is glaringly obvious. India's exports to the U.S. sit at $71.4 billion, completely dwarfing its $46.8 billion in imports. That age-old strategy of buying raw and selling finished? Yeah, it's working flawlessly.
So the ultimate takeaway here is that India generated a huge $24.6 billion trade surplus. By mastering the supply chain, literally importing rocks and crude oil, and exporting dazzling gems and medicine, India walked away $24.6 billion ahead in just a single financial year. That is pure net profit for their economy. Which leaves us with one final, pretty amazing thought to ponder. As India perfects this incredibly efficient engine, taking America's raw earth and selling back the medicine in your cabinet or the gas in your car, how much larger is this global advantage going to grow? The data is showing us a powerhouse in motion, one that's fundamentally reshaping global trade. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the data.